Welcome to the Aconic Podcast with me, Soon Yu, your host. The Aconic Podcast features candid conversations with successful Asian and AAPI leaders who share their personal journeys of challenges and triumphs. The Aconic Podcast is brought to you by the Asian American Foundation, by Gold House, and by the founders of the Asian Alumni Chapter of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and is made possible through the generous support of Altos Ventures.
We move really quickly, reposition with new product, new marketing, a lot of things. And it turned out to be the biggest bomb or the biggest failure. Considering, like you said, I had a lot of successes in my career. I never had something that didn't work in such a big way. I immediately got up in front of the entire company and said, you know what, I was wrong.
I'm so excited to welcome my next guest. I've actually been planning to have a conversation with her like this for probably 4 or 5 years now. We've tried to collaborate on a few things, and I guess good things happen to those who are patient and wait. And so this is my belated Christmas present to be able to have a conversation with Jenny Ming. Welcome, Jenny.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, you're right. We've been trying to meet each other, have a conversation. So I'm so thrilled to be here today.
That's right. And, because of all you do, we have probably, I think 1 degree of separation in terms of friends and things that you've been involved in. And so your name has come up so often that, my curiosity, my interest, and obviously our shared sort of passion for the community has made me, you've been on my target. So I'm so glad you can join the Aconic Podcast today. For those of you who don't know, and I think most of you probably do know, Jenny is one of our icons. She has been an incredible leader for our community. And today she's actually, to my surprise, because I think you only started this 6 months ago or a year ago, you are now the CEO of Rothy, which is one of the most on-trend fashion brands that I think everybody wants to have a part of. You guys are sustainable. You have all the right people involved. You have Katie Holmes and Meghan Markle, Reese Witherspoon, all endorsing the brand. And now you've extended it to all the things that you are good at, which is this idea of genderless or more genders and into just beyond clothing, into handbags. And so what a fantastic background that you bring to Rothy's, right? You were the former founder and president of Old Navy. You ran, you're CEO of Charlotte Russe, and you always have an incredible background in general management and fashion. And in terms of accolades, I was looking it up. You were voted the most powerful woman by Fortune. And then also the top 25 manager in all of business by Business Week. So, those are pretty incredible accolades. So, of course, we're very excited to speak with you today. So, welcome.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you. That's quite an introduction.
Yes. Well, I think we have a lot to talk about because
yes, we do.
When we started this podcast, we really wanted to feature on the hero's journey, the idea of, the not only reaching the highest heights, but actually the struggles and challenges of trying to get there. And you and I, when we did the pre-call, you said, "Oh boy, I got a lot of those stories," right? And I think it all starts from this idea that you have an immigrant background, as I do, and you very much epitomize what I would consider the immigrant's journey, right? Very humble beginnings. You've had to overcome multiple stereotypes from whether it be gender, education, being a minority. And in many ways, you've transformed yourself from being, I think at one point you're very focused on the home, and now you're all focused on fashion. And I'm sure beyond that, you went from being a very functional expert to now you're an incredible generalist. And then I think the one I love the most is at one point you were voted the most bashful person in the class, and now you're incredibly bold and incredibly vocal. And I love all those transformations. So with this idea of the immigrant story, why don't we start from the beginning with your parents and their decision to actually come to Canada, not to the U.S.?
Exactly. Well, that's what I tell this story quite a bit as an immigrant. You could only imagine, because it is a very typical immigrant story. We immigrate to this country is because our parents feel like we will have better opportunity, education, job, life, right? So, very typical. There was 5 kids and we lived in Chinatown in a 2-bedroom. Actually, it's 1 bedroom. We converted our dining room to a bedroom.
Wow.
On Jackson Street. And it's, I was 9 years old. I was also a very sickly child. I actually, came from Macau. I'm the middle child. Didn't speak a word of English. I think I was 40 pounds when I was, 9. Always in a doctor's office. Somehow, obviously, I came to the right country. Immediately I was better. I didn't get so sick, and, so I think it was destined that I was going to come into the US, and learned to speak English and went to, public elementary school, middle school, and high school. And, I study home economics. I wanted to be a home ec teacher. So it's very different than what I do today, but it just tells you the journey, how things could change and how you could react to the change and take the opportunity that comes to you and what you make of it is what I'm trying to say. So my parents came for better opportunity and we certainly see that. And I was a home ec teacher and I, obviously, the California school system decided it wasn't academic enough and canceled it in all the curriculum. And I was like, a junior in college in San Jose State. And I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? My boyfriend then, who's now my husband, said, oh, Jenny, you always love clothes. You should be a buyer. I mean, you could imagine that, the kind of conversation you have when you're 20 years old. And I did. I interviewed and, went into an executive training program. It became a buyer. So again, when things in your life changes or when doesn't go your way, instead of looking at it as the bad thing or downside, I always look at things on the positive, optimistic side. And you know what? It served me well.
Well, your humble beginnings in many ways, it sort of speaks to the idea that you saw each new opportunity, sort of each new challenge that there was going to be another opportunity potentially presenting itself. I mean, when I was researching about your background, what was so interesting is that your family first immigrated from China with the thought of actually moving to Canada, which is what I thought was so interesting. But then you guys were sort of parked in Macau for 9 years as you was waiting for the immigration to clear.
Exactly. And it didn't happen in Canada. And, what's really strange, or it should be funny or fate, we finally got permission to go to Canada. And the same time, actually, but it was a week, I think it was a week or a month later. And the US actually, gave us permission to immigrate to the US. So my father said it was meant to be, for 9 years where we're waiting for Canada. And things happen really smoothly with the US. So he decided, and we had a lot more family in Canada than in the US. We only have one aunt. But my father made that decision that felt like it was meant to be that we should go to the US.
That's amazing. I think your whole life is filled with this idea of opportunities and pivots, right? I mean, you guys
exactly.
You could have been the CEO of Canada Goose for all we know.
Well, I could have been in, I mean, you could only imagine when I was, went back to Macau many times, as a denim buyer, because a lot of denim is made in Macau, especially at the wash houses. I say, if I never immigrated, I probably would be working in one of these factories as a supervisor or as a manager, So yes, you're right. So much of life, what they serve is what you make of it really matters.
And I think it's such an incredible story for all of us to think about the idea that, hey, we're not sure what that next opportunity is going to be, but if you are open to it and you take full advantage of it and you live in that moment, right? You can make the most of it. And I think there's a big theme about making the most of what's been given to you. So look, the other challenge you had, here's a couple of pivots. One, your family, decided we're, hey, US a little more welcoming, even with less family there. We're going to move to San Francisco, right?
Yes.
You lived in a 1-bedroom / 2-bedroom of a dining room you converted with with 7 people. I mean, that must have been a lot of bunk beds, I guess. I'm assuming.
Yes, it was bunk beds. But you know what? I look at all of those and I so appreciate those experiences because I'm actually very close to my brothers and sister. Even to this day, we all live in the Bay Area. We see each other all the time. I think it brought us even closer together. And yeah, I didn't even know to have my own bedroom, what that felt like. And I actually didn't even want to be honest with you. So again, it's what you know and how you make the best of something.
That's incredible because I think if somebody would have said, hey, I have a crystal ball and I think you're going to be CEO of a Fortune 500 company and you're going to be, the icon for Asian women in business, you would have looked at them saying, I'm barely making it to, like getting nourished now and getting to school. And I think you even went to school near Chinatown, right? In Nob Hill, right? And was it Spring?
Exactly. It was
Spring Valley?
Garfield. I went to Spring Valley first and then I went to Garfield. And it's right, underneath Court Tower. But I also went to Chinese school, when we moved to the Richmond district, if you know San Francisco at all. And I took a bus down, every day, weekday for an hour to go to Chinese school for 2 hours and then took the bus back home in the Richmond district. Of course, at that time, I didn't thank my parents. In fact, I was cursing my mother. I would never do that to my children, make them go to Chinese school. And I'm so thankful because I speak fluent Cantonese, because she made me, kept my heritage. It kept my language. But you could only imagine when you're 14, 15, 16 years old, that's the last thing you want to do, right?
Yeah, I can't even imagine. And what's so interesting is that you had another pivot in college, which was you had gone in thinking, I am going to teach home economics. By the way, I looked up home economics and it was, I had a few obviously home economics classes and they were actually some of my funnest classes. I remember throwing my first little teddy bear and I thought that was cool. I learned how to cook, fry an egg, do stuff like that. And I didn't realize that homemakers represent over $5 trillion worth of economic output in the U.S. alone. And if you think about 90% of us are doing homemaking activities, right? It's part, household penetration is incredibly high. So the idea of actually bringing, leadership and innovation there actually is very powerful. I'm pretty sad that they canceled that. But okay, so they canceled it on your junior year and you're basically looking at your job opportunities and they went to zero, didn't they?
Yeah. But this is when you pivot. And like I said, my boyfriend then, who's now my husband, said, you should be a buyer. You love clothes. And I did, but I never thought about that being a career. And I did follow through with it and became a buyer. And I have to say, I was a really, really good buyer and I loved the job. It's about spotting trends, serving it up to your, customer. And, I travel quite a bit, so it makes it even more fun. I couldn't imagine, what a better career that was, so, and to this day, I was very thankful that, I didn't become a home ec teacher, but to this day, I still love to cook. It's my passion and my pastime. So you could sometimes, if it doesn't become your career, it can also become your passion too. Right.
I heard you have a pretty killer chocolate chip ice cream cookie. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, when I was a Charlotte, it was I really believe in bringing your whole self to work, whoever you are personally and professionally. So every summer we would have a barbecue and I would make ice cream sandwiches for everybody. Of course, we started out with a very small group, like 100 people. So making 200 chocolate chip cookies, not too much. And then I scoop ice cream and make everybody ice cream sandwiches. And then we grew to 200, 300. I was like, oh my God, I'm baking 600 cookies. But, I think things like that, it just is really about giving yourself to something you love and the people that works with you. I mean, I always consider people that work with me is extension of my family. Right. So I love to be able to do, I'm such a mom, in many ways. I love to cook for people and, nourish them. So, these are all the fun little facts. I'm shocked that you know so much.
Well, what I find really interesting is this idea of bringing your full self to work. And that is really the recipe of being authentic. And so it's so easy, I think, in the way we've been raised to compartmentalize, right? Like we got a work self, we've got a personal self, and then we have a family self, but the three don't always necessarily mix. And I think what you're saying is that if you can bring elements of all to each, everyone can benefit. And then the idea that I can know you more fully and connect with you more fully, there's some power in that. I think that's incredible. And that's probably how I've read some of your management philosophy, and this idea of bringing your full self is a big theme in terms of how you were so successful at Gap. So let's actually step back a little bit. So you decided to not do home ec. Well, you didn't decide. Somebody decided for you that home economics wasn't going to be your path. And so you went into buying. And I think from there, you probably learned some key skills that have served you to today, which is understanding consumers and what they like, and seeing trends and being able, and then trying to source or find where you can get the best of the best to actually meet that need. So I think those are incredible skills you probably use today. You built up a bit of a reputation at Mervyn's, right? That was kind of your first job. How in the world did Mickey Drexler, who's an icon in the retail industry, and for those of you who don't know, how in the world did he basically pluck you out of Mervyn's and find you to begin with, and then convince you to come to Gap?
He actually called me. I was just reading about him in Business Week. And because he's such an icon, he was doing something really unusual at the Gap at that time. It's called specialty retailing. It means, everything in that store is under Gap label, and you create it, you design it, you produce it. So, and so many people were trying to copy them. In fact, Mervyn's, I was interviewing for a product development job, because that's what
Mervyn's. At Mervyn's?
Okay, yes, Mervyn's. Okay. Actually, I probably had one of the most successful department, most profitable, and one of the largest department at Mervyn's. And I didn't get the job. Oh, wow. And I got a call from Mickey, who actually we were trying to copy. And he said to me, he said, I heard, it wasn't his assistant. He called me directly. And I thought, oh gosh, could it be a joke or something? Because
right, they don't usually Mickey.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So is this mom? Is this my brother? Who's pulling my leg here?
So he called me and said, I heard you are the best buyer out there. I'm like, really? And he said, I said, well, who told you that? And he said, Hal Kaufman, who was one of my denim vendor, and told him, he said, he called Hal, who was a, childhood friend, and say, who out there as a buyer you think a lot of that you would recommend? And Hal Kaufman recommended me. And so he called me directly and said, I heard so much about you. I love to, if you're interested in coming to the Gap, I would love to talk to you. Of course, I didn't get the job I wanted at Mervyn's. So I went, of course I said yes, because I wanted to meet him, but I wasn't really serious about leaving Mervyn's at that time, because, this is one of my fun facts. At that time, I had 3 kids under the age of 2. So you probably wonder, like, how can I have 3 kids under age 2? I had a daughter. 17 months later, I had twins. Oh, so wow. Within that 2 years, I had 3 kids. So when you have that, it's probably the last thing you want is a new job, right? But I was so fascinated with Mickey that of course I went. In fact, I went to see him when my twins turned 1 year old. So I remember it really, really clearly. And in fact, my conversation within 10 minutes, I decided I really want to work for him if he gave me the job. And this is within 10 minutes. And people would ask me why, how? And I said, well, he just launched Baby Gap or Gap Kids. And I actually bought a little denim skirt for my daughter who was 2 years old, and it's too big. So I actually complained as a customer. I say, your sizing is wrong. My daughter, it just slips right off. And he was such a good listener. He wasn't defensive. He picked up the phone, called an assistant buyer at that time, and said, oh, bring it up. And apparently they knew the sizings were wrong. So he gave me that little skirt. He said, bring it up, try on your daughter. Let me know how it fits her. Something like this would never happen at Mervyn's, if it happened at all. I was just that he's such a good listener of customer, and that they move and react to things so quickly. And I said, I wanted to work for someone like that. So, and luckily I actually, I was the second merchant that he brought into the Gap brand. So,
wow. So how old were you at that time?
I think, maybe at 33.
Okay, gosh. And
yeah,
so
early 30s.
Wow. So you had gone from San Jose State, you worked in Mervyn's for a while, then you built up a reputation. He found you through one of, obviously a joint contact and somebody who you worked with. What I think is so fascinating about the story is, again, the theme of one door closed in Mervyn's and another door opened in Gap. And you said, let's go for it.
Exactly.
And I loved how in 10 minutes you were able to intuit what was really important in both a boss, but also somebody who's going to be leading a new business, which is ear to the ground or to the consumer. And then the ability to react to that like immediately while he was sitting there with you. And what I also find very fascinating is he didn't call the VP, then that called the director, then he called the assistant buyer, knew who that person was and said, whoever their name was, hey, we this confirms what we already knew. Can you find something that we've been working on that we can share with Jenny? And that to me is incredible.
But that tells you a lot about that person, how he leads, right? And, for me, it was very intuitive, that, I wanted to work for someone like that. And as you said, he's absolutely an icon, in retail. And I have to give him a lot of accolade for, been my mentor, my boss for all these years. I really, truly, professionally would not be who I am if I never worked for him. So.
That's great. And having good sponsors and mentors like that. And I think that's another key is, who you work for really does matter. I know people don't, I think it really matters a lot. So if given a choice, be choosy about what jobs you take, not based on just the job, but actually who is it that you're going to learn from, right? And that's really important.
That actually is my number one advice I always give when people get out of college or when they're early in their career. I say, it's not the company or the title or how much money you make. It's really who you get to work with. And the people and the person that you work with matters is because they influence you, teaches you. I always look for people that want to teach you and give themselves. And to me, that's probably the most important thing in your young career.
During the height of the Asian hate crimes, I was left with a sense of disbelief and anger. These feelings prompted me to write a Forbes article titled, "Who Owns the AAPI Brand?" It's clear that branding such a diverse community is difficult. Yet in the absence of a cohesive brand narrative, derogatory stereotypes and racial slurs were created. Fortunately, the AAPI community did come together and form TAF, the Asian American Foundation, to not only combat Asian hate, but to also share positive narratives that fight bias and promote belonging. TAF has launched numerous programs to support this effort, including the Aconic Podcast. Please visit TAF.org to learn more, and to subscribe to this podcast, please visit aconicpodcast.com. Join me in supporting TAF, because together we make a difference.
I said, Mickey, you asked me last year, was I interested in being the president of Onidi? And I said, no, but I thought a lot about it. I want to, I'm ready. And he started laughing. He said, Jenny, I thought you would be in my office at least a month, maybe 2. I didn't expect you to wait a year.
Wow. So, I always talk about with companies, there's 2 products. One product is obviously the product or service you're offering to people that are paying. But the other product is to another stakeholder group, which is your employees. It's your colleagues. And the product there is culture, right? And what you're describing is a culture where you actually have a manager that wants to teach you, that then is role modeling for you and new behavior, which is then you want to teach others. And that's really a virtuous,
and that's the way it should be, right? You keep passing it on to the next generation or the same generation. And that's probably what I'm most excited about my entire career is the people I got, the incredible people I've worked with through my years.
Well, one of the groups that you got to work with was the Old Navy team, right? Yes. You had a skyrocketing career at Gap, I think you were promoted, like you jumped 2 or 3 levels and your so-called domain expanded within 3 years. Like you doubled your business and then you were, I think from a buyer or whatever you were all the way to VP in 3 years. That's pretty incredible. But I think the most exciting part is when you were tapped to work with another group of people that you really worked well with, to do Old Navy. Can you talk a little bit about that and the team dynamic there?
Well, actually, I was going up to tell Mickey my husband got a new job in Hong Kong and that we were going to move in the summer. And when my kids were, they were like 7 and 8, they were still fairly young. And he said, "Oh, we just decided we're going to launch a new, division. We had Banana and then we had the Gap in the middle. We don't serve the mass market, or the value market. And we thought, you should lead it." And I'm like, "You're just saying it because you want me to stay." But he said, no, this is really, the board just approved it yesterday. So I love that idea. I thought, what an incredible opportunity to be able to do a startup inside Gap Inc., right? And I absolutely could relate to this because my Mervyn's background of mass merchants. So of course I had to go home and tell my husband, who actually just accepted a job and about to leave his job, that this opportunity came up. And, we're both very, our number one priority would be our children. And we both decided the best place to bring up our kids was here in the US. So he decided, so I said, "Why don't you take time off, get our house in order?" Because we were trying to remodel for 3 years and never made it. So I said, maybe you could do that. And then I will focus on my new job. And, and that's exactly. So I was employee number 1 for this new division, which turns out to be Old Navy. So we start Old Navy with 11 people. And it was almost like whoever is available, and within 6 months, we roll out this new concept. We call it Gap Warehouse, and, eventually became Old Navy. And I would say first day, within the first 2-3 months, we knew we had a winner already. But I also told the team, I said, if we don't, actually, most startups never make money, as you know, but we make money the first year. Cause I said to the team, if we don't make money, we will never roll out. So let's really focus on that. And we did. We make money the first 6 months of the year, and the rest is history. Old Navy, it's so easy to talk about it now, but when I stepped out of Gap brand and ran Old Navy and started Old Navy, 90% of the people thought I was crazy taking such a huge risk because Gap was such a known entity. What's so strange was I never thought it was a risk. I thought it was an incredible opportunity. So again, I think as you said, how everybody views something is very different. I thought, gosh, what a great opportunity for me to learn something new, to broaden my horizon as a general manager. So I was not just a merchant, I had visual, I had production, I had the planning of the business. So, this was the beginning of broadening my general management skills. But it also taught me how important people is, your team is, because you're only as good as the team you have. So I spent a lot of time, making sure I could develop them and hiring the right team. We won a lot of awards, and I could go on and on about it. But one of the biggest one was that we hit $1 billion in less than 4 years.
Wow.
Which is unheard of in retail.
Especially back then. Back then, it was
back then.
There was no digital, right? It was all stores. And
it was the most profitable business for Gap Inc. for many, many years. And probably still is.
Still is.
So, then I became the first president of Old Navy.
What was surprising about being asked to be president is that you could have been president a lot sooner, but you actually turned down the job.
Yes. I tell this story quite often because I think, there's a lot of learning in this. Okay. I think partly because when he asked me, I was just so happy being where I am. I was also very comfortable being where I am. Especially when we started Old Navy with 4 of us. So we're partners. And, I think partly was that, so I went through the process and I mean, seriously, I had the best job. I was executive vice president of merchandising, visual. I mean, like, it's more than I ever thought I could be. So during that time, of course, he was interviewing a lot of people to be president. And I was in the interview lineup. And the more people I met, I'm like, gosh, I could do that. Oh, I could do that. Then I asked myself, if someone came in to be the president, how would I feel? And I really realized I probably would be pretty bummed. So after a year, he was giving me my yearly review. I sat down and I said, Mickey, you asked me last year, was I interested in being the president of Old Navy? And I said, no, but I thought a lot about it. I want to, I'm ready. And he started laughing. He said, Jenny, I thought you would be in my office at least a month, maybe 2. I didn't expect you to wait a year. And so he said, absolutely, you should. But, there's another part to this story. So I said, but I only want to be president if my other 3 partners would say that I should be. And he started laughing again. He said, do you think if I offered them the president of the Navy that they would come to ask you if it's okay? And I said to him, it's very important to me because we've been partners and all of a sudden now I'm going to be their boss. And, I want to make sure it's okay. And I did. I asked them, I said, of course there were 3 men and they said, no, you deserve to be the president, Jenny. So that's how I became the president after, I think it was 7 years.
Wow. That's an incredible sort of journey to come to that epiphany that I actually want this job. I'm actually qualified for this job. I'm actually ready for this job. And probably most importantly, Gap's going to benefit from me being the leader here, and the people that I manage are probably going to benefit greatly. And I think that's really powerful. And I think we're both Asian. We probably both have been told, you know what, don't rock the boat. Stay on the steady path. Don't take risks. Don't do anything that makes you too uncomfortable. And at the same time, don't piss off the people that are, that got you there. And I think a lot of times what it does, it also breeds a certain degree of imposter syndrome when we are actually put into an uncomfortable or elevated position. And, I'm sure a lot of those feelings probably all went through your mind in that 1 year you were thinking about this.
You're so right. But overall, I'm a risk taker. So it's not so much about the risk. It's really about things are going so well. Why do that? But partly is that, I just never saw myself at that position, and I think pretty much, I wanted to be a buyer. So, after that, it's all been extra, So, and I think in a way that made me even more comfortable being my authentic self. I'm not afraid, to be who I am because I never expected to be here to begin with.
That's really interesting. I'm sort of listening to this and there's kind of a mix of, you're a humble person, you're down to earth. You're not pretentious. That's not kind of your DNA or makeup, and you bring that to work. And I would say that's true for a lot of the Asians I know too. At the same time, you're willing to take risk. You're willing to take on greater responsibilities. You're willing to be uncomfortable, and you can do both. And I think sometimes we as Asians tell ourselves, well, it's the culture getting in the way that's, stopping me from getting promoted. And it's my humble self that's getting, and I think you can still be humble and still achieve and still try harder things and take risks. And I don't think it has to be one or the other, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, you're so right. I think you could get those mixed up. I'm certainly a go-getter and I love, to achieve things, but I also am very aware that, you only get there if you also have an incredible team of people that works with you. It's never about yourself. I think especially as a leader, I think it's not about yourself. It's really about everybody else. I say this and I could repeat it. I said, actually, I don't do a lot of doing now, right? But everybody else do. My job is to make sure they can do what they do. And also connecting dots or connecting people, connecting idea, aligning direction. And that is a lot to do with leadership. It's not about, oh, look at me. Look what I've accomplished. Look at what I'm doing. If you think that, obviously you can't lead, especially today. I learned very early on, you're only as good as the team you have or the people you work with.
I love that. I really love the idea that, you are, a lot of your motivation comes from those you work with and wanting sort of their goodwill too, not just yours, right? And if you think of it that way, I think it gives you, I think, greater satisfaction in what you do, probably. And I'm going to turn a little bit and talk about after Old Navy, you went to Charlotte Russe. Is it Charlotte Russe? Am I saying it right? And it's a big company. I mean, it's 200 stores and a really important fashion retailer for I think the teens and 20s, and but that was one of your most difficult experiences. And I'm sure you can talk a little bit about this in terms of you had a certain expectation, you didn't meet it, and the idea that you looked in the mirror and didn't like what was happening, both, around you, but also maybe what you saw in yourself. And then the fact that you might have let others down that came with you on that journey. Can you talk a little bit about what happened?
Absolutely. First of all, after 13 years, I decided to leave Old Navy, and it's also 20 years at Gap Inc. So I just felt it was good time. I'm first of all fortunate that I could even think about doing something different, or I don't have to think about what my next job would be. So I want to take some time off and do some nonprofit. And I met with a lot of people. I met, a lot of PE firms, VCs, other companies. But I joined a board. I joined Kaiser, and we could talk about that another time too. And one PE firm, when actually I had Lululemon, and they actually interviewed me to sit on their board. As soon as he met me, he said, "You're too young to retire. Let me buy you a company to run." And eventually that was Charlotte Russe. So it was my first CEO job. And I had a vision of what I want that brand to be. It was really about, fast fashion, but fast fashion is not about, for me, it's about throwaway clothes, but fast fashion means the supply chain moves really quickly. And the faster your supply chain and closer you are, the more right you will be, and you buy less inventory, which is better for everybody, right? And so we move really quickly, reposition with new product, new marketing, a lot of things. And it turned out to be the biggest bomb or the biggest failure. Considering, like you said, I had a lot of successes in my career. I never had something that didn't work in such a big way. I immediately got up in front of the entire company and said, "You know what? I was wrong. The reposition is not right. Our customer didn't want this. We need to move back where we are. Yes, we need to make some changes, but small incremental changes, not this big, huge visionary change." And I realized, I said, "You know what? We don't own the brand. Actually, the customer owns the brand." And even though I wanted to go here, she didn't want that. And in the end of the day, the customer is always right because they make the decision, not us. So what I learned is that as a leader, it's okay to be wrong. Nobody's ever perfect, but be able to admit it so that I was able to galvanize team pretty quickly to make that change back. And then, of course, for years, we made incremental change and finally got where we want to be to begin with. So what I'm trying to say is that, okay to be wrong as a leader, but admitting it is very important. And it also taught me to really respect your customer, our customer, and don't ever underestimate them. So this went on for quite a few years. In fact, we were very successful and about to go to an IPO. We worked very hard to get there, and hired bankers, got the S1 done, and the bottom fell out. What I mean by that, there was the beginning of really more online buying. The teens no longer hang out in the shopping mall. And we had to pull it because we did not know what happened to the business or what is going on in the business. And so this IPO did not happen. And, and the business really, really took a back seat or really went bad. And that never happened. So, we had to go into a bankruptcy. And not only did we didn't go IPO, all of a sudden something that was doing so well didn't do very well because retail moves very quickly. So, I feel like very personally letting people that work with me that I'm letting them down. But as we said in the beginning, when a door closes, something else has happened. So we tidied it up the best we can. And then I stepped down and, I decided, it's time in my career, maybe not being a CEO anymore. So I focus a lot on my board work. I sit on quite a few boards and I did a executive mentoring and coaching because I feel like all my years of experience, I could help more women and more Asian to get to be in C-suites or CEO or being on boards. So that was my focus for, I would say, the last 5, 6, 7 years until, of course, Rothy came to being. So, as you said about Charlotte Russe, I had some really failures, but how I also rose to the occasion and then had really great few years. And then what happened, and I would say those actually, I probably learned the most when you fail than when you have big successes. Cause this is when you know what you have in you. And, I think one of the things that you probably know from me, even by my conversation, that I'm a pretty optimistic person. And I'm one of those people that see half glass full more than I see half empty. So I actually feel like I got a lot out of that. It made me who the person I am today, because I went through some of those failures instead of just like my old Navy days of always successes. So it's good to have both balance.
Wow. Are you ready to be part of a community that amplifies the voices of Asian leaders in business, government, and the arts? The founders of this podcast are members of the Asian Alumni Chapter of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, whose mission is to empower Asian and AAPI voices in our community. By subscribing to this podcast, you'll stay up to date on the latest Aconic episodes, and importantly, gain exclusive invitations to select Stanford Asian alumni events that can provide useful insights and a powerful network to help you on your personal and professional journeys. Go to aconicpodcast.com and subscribe today. Join us and be a part of a community that's shaping the future of Asian leadership.
I want to pause because there's so many nuggets that I think, I'm taking away, and I'm hoping the listeners do too. But I think the first is this idea of knowing and admitting to yourself before even anyone else that you were wrong. It's so easy to find scapegoats or blame circumstances or say the situation was A, B, and C, but to fully come to realization that no, I was wrong. That's very powerful. Just because I think we tend to tell the most, how do you say this? Untruths to ourselves more than anybody, right? But that's the first thing you did. You actually admitted to yourself, and then being able to do it publicly, right? That takes so much courage and vulnerability. And I mean, it's so powerful. When you said that, I definitely got the goosebumps, and just imagining standing in front of your company and actually saying that. I think another takeaway for me is the power of that, right? The power of that to galvanize, motivate. I think all of us, when somebody admits they're wrong and they say, I need your help, or look, I was wrong, I want to do better, or I want you to help me. It's very human to say, of course I'm going to help you, right? You had a mea culpa, you're admitting it and you're asking for help. You'd be almost unhuman not to want to step in. And that's an incredible way to actually galvanize your team, your company, whatever it might be. I think that's great. And the other thing I think you said at the end, I think it's really important, this idea that part of this ability to have one door close and see another door is to actually have an optimistic attitude, right? Because if you dwell, and if you're glass half empty always, and you see a door closed, you tend to dwell on that closed door, and you tend to miss all these other little creaks and other cracks and other doors that are opening up. And so I just think, again, another powerful thing. I do want to talk about your board work. You are actually on quite a few boards. You're on Kaiser, you're on Levi's, you're on Poshmark, I could go on. There's so many, Paper Source. And I think you were actually on Rothy's. Was that right? Before you actually decided to take the CEO. Well, there's a lot of people who have so much to give, right? And what advice would you give to them to say, how do you position yourselves in a way to be available and noticed by boards?
Another good question. People ask me all the time, how do I get on boards? First, I think it's, first of all, I was very fortunate. It's because when, I was leaving Old Navy, it was announced in the paper. So I got a lot of inbound, offering interviews and jobs. And I said, no, I'm going to take some time off. I want to do some nonprofit work. I want to travel for pleasure instead of travel for work. And, then I said, how about considering on boards? I'm like, oh, interesting. I said, so I actually got quite a few board offers, and I went to meet a lot of people because, I'm starting a new chapter of my life. What better is to meet new people and see what is out there. And, of course, one of them was, Lululemon, and one was Kaiser, and there was 4 other. I won't talk about that. And of course, the last thing I thought about is joining Kaiser is because I know nothing about or medicine or hospital. Of course, I thought I was going to do Lululemon. It hasn't gone public yet. It's like it's about, apparel, it's definitely up my alley, right? But when I went to meet George Offerson, who was the CEO and chairman at that time, I sat down to dinner with him in Oakland, and I said, why would you be interested in me being on your board? I know nothing about healthcare. And he said, Jenny, we have a lot of people that know a lot about healthcare, medicine, hospital plan. We don't need you for that. And I said, and he said, but you know what? You know a lot about people. You've been in retail for so long. We need to think of our patient as consumer. We need to influence them, educate them so they make better decisions for themselves in healthcare. Never thought about that. This never occurred to me. And he said, healthcare is not about sickness. It's really about wellness. It was the first time I heard the word wellness. This is 20 years ago almost. And so, needless to say, I didn't join Lululemon. I joined Kaiser because I thought, wow, it's a whole new world. There's so much I could learn. And I never thought about my contribution in a different industry. So I joined the Kaiser board. So what I want to share with this is really understand what you bring to a table on a board. Because, I want to join a board. I say, why? And sometimes people are like, well, I want to contribute. I said, what can you contribute? Around the boardroom, we all have very different experiences and skills. Really understanding what do you bring to the table is very important. And I didn't even know what I was bringing today. I thought, of course, my trend, my customer, but I never thought about, consumer, knowing a customer, knowing people, right? So I think, knowing that is very important. And also why you want to. And I always tell people, start something small. It could be a nonprofit. It could be, a private company, a startup. Don't always just I want to be on a public board. Actually, as you know, Kaiser is not a public board. It's a nonprofit. So everybody I thought you're going to be on a public board. I say, it was not about what kind of is really about, the essence of who they are is more important to me. I actually love that they are a nonprofit, has a lot of impact back to the community. So understanding the why and the how is very important. So that would be the advice I would give.
That's wonderful advice. Obviously, you've been on so many boards and you've seen other board members you've probably been involved in the selection process for other board members. And so I think this idea of let's walk before we run. And I think nonprofit is or startups are such a great way to get exposed to the idea of being on a board and realizing that you don't run anything, but boy, your advice, your network, your ideas are of high value and you have to be fairly collaborative with the management team to get anything done because you don't run anything either. Right. So it's just a powerful idea to kind of just, walk before we run. I think this other idea of knowing what we can contribute and actually I sort of appreciate an idea that what you bring may not be what's in the makeup of the current board. In fact, maybe that's actually a better reason for them to want you is you're bringing something new to the table that they're not expecting.
Well, I think this is the piece that is so important is I think as Asian, as AAPI community, really, so many times we get forgotten. We tend to be the more quiet one in the room or in the boardroom. And I think sometimes is really for us to really earn our voice, use our voice. It's so important to speak out. It's so important to raise your hand and share your opinion. To me, we need to do that. And our voice is important. And I try to really do my part, but I just really could not say enough. You don't have to be the loudest voice, right, in the room, but a diverse voice in a room, in a boardroom, in business is essential, and it's critical, and it's important. And I think we need to realize this is what we bring to the table.
I think that's incredibly practical advice, is to raise your hand. And I think people think, well, raising my hand doesn't mean I have to get up and give a speech. Doesn't mean that I have to. I think a simple way that I recommend is anytime someone says, does anyone have any questions? Do your homework. Realize that question may be asked, and that you should come prepared with one or two questions, because the power of asking a good question, one, it can change the entire conversation. Two, because people are talking about something that you prompted, even though they're talking, it's actually your topic, and you're actually controlling the room at that moment with your thought leadership. And I just think it's a powerful way for people who aren't necessarily, it's like walking before we run again, right? And not necessarily, you don't want to give a PowerPoint presentation in front of everybody. Ask a good question. That's a great way to get your voice and your thought leadership heard.
Yeah. I like I said, I do a lot of mentoring and coaching. I always say that, you should never leave a meeting without asking a question or giving your point of view. That is your homework.
That's right. Absolutely.
Exactly. Right. And like I said, you don't have to be the loudest. You don't have to be the one who asked the most, but just at least start with one.
I've enjoyed this conversation. We could probably go on for another few hours, and I know we have mutual friends, and so there's so much more we could be talking about. And I have a little bit of obviously a fashion background with VF, but we could trade war stories. But what I think is so powerful is that at one point in your life, you were voted the most bashful person in your class, and then you had a manager basically say you'll never succeed because you're a pushover. Well, gosh. Those classmates and that manager were dead wrong. So, Jenny, it's an amazing career you've had. You've pretty much proven all the skeptics wrong. You've broken all these stereotypes, and you continue to do it every single day. You're doing it with Rothy's. We didn't really even talk about that. Just share a little bit. What's going on? Why did you decide to go from the board to Rothy's, and what's your vision going forward there?
Well, first of all, like you said, I never thought about stepping back in as a CEO. I was on the board, and, they asked me to come in and help a little bit on, operating, help them work better together and craft the strategy. Of course, once I stepped in, I always knew that. And that's one of the reasons why I joined the company. I love the mission and the purpose, using recycled plastic to make something new and beautiful. To be honest, it's really the incredible people that work here and the innovation that we have. It's almost, fortunate that I get to step in to lead this brand to the next, level. So it just, like I said, I couldn't plan something this good. And it is really about the brand, the mission, the purpose, the people, and where we are is really about scaling, getting more brand awareness out there, and take it to more than just domestically in the US. I think we have lofty goals that we could be a global brand, and we love to have more brands and businesses that are sustainable, that is friendly to the planet, all of that. I would love to be able to be, part of that and lead that kind of mission and purpose, in my next evolution as a leader. Right. So I think one thing for sure, age has nothing to do with it. I usually, there's no such thing as time to retire. Even when I was retiring, I wasn't retired. I think if you have a thirst for continuous learning and curious, I think that, and you enjoy what you do, there's no such thing as a time limit when you should stop working. It's really individually, right? So, I'm just thrilled that I get to do this again. And I want to use this platform and to speak out even more than ever before, especially on AAPI issues and subjects.
Well, you're a treasure to the community. I mean, it's amazing. I love what Rothy's is all about. It's really about new economics. Old economics used to be, you did macro and it was all about, the savings, investment, blah. And all the new theories talk about two new variables, which is social welfare and environmental impact. And you're addressing both along with economic output. And to be pivoting to this new door and actually creating a platform for it, I think is super exciting. Thank you for taking some time with us today. Before I close, I just have one last question. Is there other leaders and guests that you think the audience would really benefit from? And I want you to go ahead and invite them on, and we'll try to get them on for a future episode.
Okay. I will. Actually, let's think about that. I think that's terrific because there's so many interesting people here. I mean, you're just starting this podcast, so I'm sure you're looking for interesting conversation.
That's how I found you. I think both Deb Lou, Deb Sue, all these people said, you got to speak with Jenny.
And I'm fortunate to meet Deb and Debbie. I mean, seriously, you named two of my two most favorite women out there already as the CEO. So I could only imagine how aligned we are.
Well, it's great to have a trifecta of you guys on our first season. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast, Jenny, and I really enjoyed it. Listen to all episodes of Aconic on aconicpodcast.com. You can also catch new episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.